So I'm speaking with composer Joel P. West, whose versatility as a storyteller has given us wonderful scores to such films as Short Term 12, Grandma, Safe Light, Youth in Oregon, Grass Stains, and now his most recent score to The Glass Castle, starring Brie Larson and Woody Harrelson. Joel reunites with Short Term 12 director Destin Daniel Cretton for this coming-of-age drama based on the memoir of Jeanette Walls. Joel, thank you so much for chatting again. It's so great to have you back as a guest.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So I'd love to kind of revisit, the last time we talked was almost 4 years ago. I'd love to revisit kind of the story of how you found the path to film composing, and when did music enter your life, and how did that kind of shift into a career in film and TV composition?
Yeah, it's great that we're talking about The Glass Castle because Destin Cretton is kind of my entry point into film music. I was always a songwriter first. I never really wanted to do music for work because it's always just been a little too important to me artistically. And I went to school for art and design. And while I was in college and kind of just out of college, I was actually teaching high school for a bit. I was always writing songs and recording albums just because it was something I sort of had to do. I don't have a lot of musical training. It's just something that I sort of gravitated towards around maybe when I was like 12 or 13. And so sometime around, I don't know, maybe a little over a decade ago, the music I was writing was starting to be more slow and pretty and oriented with a lot of strings and orchestral type of instruments. And I think it just so happened that the music that I was interested in and the music that I like making just tends to work for film because I've always been a big fan of recorded music. I like live music too, but I think I first found music by having albums to go take on road trips or walks and to kind of like give context to other experiences. And so it ended up being a natural fit, but just something I'd never really thought about because I didn't really grow up watching too many movies, and I definitely didn't go to film school. I'm still catching up on all those movies you're supposed to watch at some point.
Right.
So Destin and I were both living in San Diego, and it's a pretty small creative community, and so we sort of just found each other as you do in a smaller town like that, and we started working together. He was making some videos, live performance videos, and music videos for my band, The Tree Ring, and I started giving him some music. Originally he had used some of my existing music, and there was a couple other filmmakers who were starting to use just songs from my albums or instrumental versions of them for film. And he at some point wrote me into doing a TV documentary. It was my first time ever scoring something, and I just kind of got the bug because it was I'd never really considered the route before, but I found it to be really creatively satisfying and really fun to work on a team, and to have kind of like a school assignment, like a little bit of some rules already to work in or something that needed to be accomplished, which is really inspiring for me as a musician. And so I started pursuing it and just, I still write songs and make albums. I just released an album with, I have a new band called Floodcoats, and I found that the film music kind of feeds my personal music and vice versa. It's kind of nice to just go back and forth. A handful of years later, we're here, and it's and I love it. I'm gonna keep doing it.
That's awesome. So that's great that you can have kind of two worlds where you can be locked away alone in a room and then kind of be with the band and be kind of more a collaborative kind of environment like that.
Yeah, it's kind of nice because usually by the end of a film project, I have a bunch of ideas that I got along the way that don't make sense for the movie or didn't make the cut in some way, and so it usually feels a little bit like school's out, and I'm excited to go work on my own stuff and sort of have the chains off. But I find if I'm trying to do songwriting and just music on my own for too long, I start really wanting structure. So it's a nice back and forth, and usually when I'm in one phase, by the time I get to it, I'm kind of hungry for the other. So I always try and have some work music and some personal music going on to just sort of go back and forth between.
Right. So yeah, I mentioned earlier the last time we did an interview was 4 years ago, and that was right when Short Term 12 came out. So how, I mean, how have you changed much in terms of being a storyteller and a composer? Have you noticed that you've been picking up new approaches, new techniques that you've kind of incorporated into your workflows?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Short Term 12 was my first feature film score. I learned so much on that, and luckily I had such a creative shorthand already with Destin that we were able to kind of figure it out together because he hadn't ever made a feature with just score in it before, and so we were both learning. And since then, I've just gotten a lot of practice. I think I maybe have done 10 movies since then, so it was really fun to come back and work with him again, having a bit more understanding of how it all works. And it's one of those things where it's really hard. It seems like a really tough thing to learn without just doing it because you always kind of, at least I always think I know what's going to work for scenes or for a movie overall, and then the first idea usually doesn't. It just takes a lot of trial and error. And so I think the biggest thing that's happened between Short Term 12 and The Glass Castle, other than just me getting to do a bunch of other movies that are all kind of slightly different and had different challenges, is I've just learned to be more of a filmmaker because I really hadn't watched too many movies when I scored Short Term 12, and so I found that as a film composer, music is what I'm bringing to the table, but I'm really just another storyteller and a filmmaker, and so I think that's the area I've probably grown in the most. Is I've just started watching a lot of movies and paying attention to really not just what score is doing, but just editing and character development, all those things, because ultimately that's what I'm there to support. And I've kind of found that the more I understand how a film is put together, and the more I'm able to critique what's working or not working, or what makes something really special or what makes it confusing when I'm watching other movies, has really been the biggest tool in learning how to support a filmmaker's direction with the music.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, you are a storyteller and you are a filmmaker, and you're using your tool, which is music, to tell that story. And so when Destin called you up and said, "Hey, I'm making another movie. It's The Glass Castle." What were kind of the initial conversations that you had with him, and what were kind of those musical ideas that you were discussing at the very beginning of this whole project?
Yeah, so Destin, this is a memoir, and Destin was from the start just very, very true to not just the book, but the author's just personal story, and he was first and foremost just wanting to really take care of her story and her family. It's a really intimate and kind of it's kind of an intense. It's not a story that everybody would want to tell if it was their story. And so the first thing is he said, just you should read the book and dig into it and just watch for any music references. So the first thing I did is just went through the book and tried to figure out any moments where music comes into play in Jeanette's story. And then Destin asked Jeanette some additional questions to kind of get a context for what music was around in her childhood and what music her family is into. She grew up largely in West Virginia, but the music you think of from that era wasn't really a part of her musical language, because initially I thought, oh, it's West Virginia, so we should really do something in the Appalachian world, but that wasn't really something that she had ever connected to. So the first references were just some things that her dad liked, which are kind of more just Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson. There's a lot of references in the book to 60s and 70s country music, Kitty Wells, Roy Acuff, stuff like that. And so that was sort of the first idea. And we knew we wanted to keep the musical language. This movie spans like 30 years, and so we wanted to make sure that the instrumentation was simple enough that it would make sense for all of those eras, and that it would have an organic quality, because it is a pretty modest upbringing that she had, and they were kind of rambling around in the desert in the Southwest and throughout West Virginia, and so wanted to have something organic to it. And then additionally, Destin had this really interesting initial idea, which I think kind of set off the tone of the movie, which is that he said he wanted it to feel like Christmas music because there's a lot of strong memories in the book that Jeanette references that are around Christmas time. And there's something about Christmas music that has kind of an emotional heaviness, but also a really nice, warm, fuzzy, magic feeling that just does seem so related to the way you feel when you think back on childhood memories, or when you go through a photo album or something. So that was the other charge, is to kind of pick apart what about Christmas music makes it feel like that, besides those just big melodies that we all know.
Absolutely. So when you kind of started taking in the story and everything, did you kind of approach it by writing themes for certain characters, or did you want to keep it? I mean, there are a lot of kind of key characters in the story, with Jeanette being kind of the main one. But how did you work the score thematically, or did you just kind of build a central theme, or did you give characters certain kind of melodic motifs?
We did really go pretty old school thematic on this. Dustin loves old movie scores and just melodies, even if they're simple melodies that are recognizable and kind of have something iconic to him. And so he really wanted that. I love that stuff too. And so there are 4 or 5 specific themes in the movie, but they're not for different characters. What they really ended up being for is all of the different aspects of Jeanette's relationship with her dad, Rex. And so in this movie, you watch her go from this childhood wonder and kind of just blind trust and appreciation for her dad into kind of a dark and slightly icky, disappointed mode when she sort of understands as she's growing up what their real situation is, and then ultimately comes back around to appreciating her dad, but in kind of a more realistic way. And so the idea was that we would have a few themes that kind of echo the different phases of their relationship. There's a theme for when she's feeling scared of Rex and not trusting Rex. There's a theme for when she's really connecting with him. There's a theme that's kind of Rex's magic theme when she's totally buying into this grandiose world that he's always painting. And so it was more about making these simple melodies that would identify those different parts of their relationship, and then let us expand with the instrumentation and the size of them throughout the movie to track, kind of use those same themes and let them grow and ebb and flow as her relationship changes throughout this pretty long span that the movie covers.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's really awesome. So since it does kind of span over such a long time, with showing her childhood and then her adult life, and you did talk about how you kind of approached that a little bit, but did you use the music at all to create a sense of time or setting, or did you just kind of make it, trying to weave the score through everything to make it one kind of flowing arc?
Yeah, we had looked at that idea for a bit of wondering, should we use the music to help? Because we move around a lot in this movie. It's jumping time constantly, and so that was kind of an initial thought, is like, should we help the audience by trying to use the music to mark what time frame we're in? And it ended up being a little more ethereal than that, and it really ended up being kind of like I was saying, tracking Jeanette's relationship with her dad. And so it's more what we did is sort of stretch the size and the mood of the same music throughout the film. So when it starts, Jeanette's 3 years old and she's just in love with everything that her dad says and the adventure of their whole rambling lifestyle. And so the music is huge. It sounds like Aaron Copland, like big Americana, like really over the top, glossy, epic orchestral music. And then it slowly, the same music kind of just whittles down to be a little more rickety, a little simpler, smaller, more intimate, and at times kind of uncomfortable. And then as she sort of comes back around in the third act, the goal was we were trying to rebuild that same music with more honest instruments, but back into kind of a more peaceful and happy place. So sort of, I guess, starting, there's a little bit of a false feeling to the music in the beginning of the movie because she's sort of seeing just the good side, and but the idea was that we would strip it down and then sort of reassemble it with some more honest sounds to just track her journey with her dad.
Wow, that's awesome. Since the film is such a, I mean, it's a character study, and they're very, performance heavy, and it's really focused on these characters and what the actors are bringing to them. Was it hard to kind of make sure that the music wasn't too melodramatic? Because I think it's very easy for music to kind of do too much. And did you kind of have to make sure that the music wasn't pushing hard too much?
Yeah, it was so hard. It's we're walking such a fine line in this movie, and it's such an authentic movie, and the performances are so authentic that it's one of the daunting things as a composer to watch scenes that just play so well with no music, and to go, man, this doesn't need anything, but the film overall needs music, and so we tiptoed around scenes for. I mean, we just spent a lot of time because you're absolutely right. It's a fine balance, and it'd be such a shame in any of these really beautifully written and very authentically acted scenes to just ruin them with music and make them feel like we're just forcing people to try and believe a certain, or, feel a certain thing. And so what it ended up being is just we just tried everything, and Destin is. He's really great at pushing his team to try everything, and then once you kind of find it and it's good, to make sure it's good by trying a bunch of other things or pushing a little further or taking some more things away. And so we just spent 3 or 4 months just trying with every scene. We just tried everything we could think of. A lot of times just throwing music at a scene that we knew was wrong, but just to try and figure out why it was wrong. And ultimately, it kind of gave us a confidence in the music that because we tried so many things by the end that when we were doing the final recording, there's a few moments where we kind of went, what if we should do this? Or I wonder if this would maybe be better differently. And then we would remember, like, oh yeah, we tried that. We tried it like 3 times, and this is the best thing for the scene. So that's yeah, and I think it's one of Destin's best strengths as a storyteller. He has such a good he can make movie magic and create these really like memorable and sort of magical scenes, but they always feel so real. And it is a tough task to meet that musically, but we found that there's really no way to do it other than just try everything and just spend a lot of time whittling away at what the best fit is.
Right. I mean, so for that process, I mean, you mentioned the kind of trial and error process, and so when do you know when it's right? I mean, it's pretty easy to know when it's wrong because you don't feel it. But I guess, do you use your instinct? Do you rely on your director, such as Destin, in this situation, or like when do you know that you've found the right thing?
I think that one thing I learned on this movie particularly was that I think that probably the most definitive answer to that question would be we knew it was right whenever we would do a test screening with a new audience and when we wouldn't squirm when the scene came on. Because a lot of times it is very easy to tell when something's not working. But then even when something felt like it was working and was good, the true test was watching a whole movie straight through with some friends or with a bigger test audience, and it seems like all the problems reveal themselves in that, because you just you can feel when the music's taking you out of the movie or when it's pushing too hard. There was a handful of scenes that we scored over and over and over again and tried so many different things, and then ultimately tried doing a test screening with no music in the scene, and then ended up going, all right, no music, that played the best. So it's that's something about sitting next to other people who haven't seen the movie yet makes you really, there's kind of no way to fake that understanding that you get by just watching somebody else watch the movie and take in the story, and then really kind of stop thinking about the music as much as whether or not the whole thing is working for them, and then figure out what music can do better to make their experience, smooth and authentic.
No, for sure, and I know that feeling because you it's just something when you like feed off their energy when you're next to someone who's watching something for the first time, and you've seen it thousands of times, and all of a sudden you suddenly are seeing the movie in a completely new way, like you're in their body watching it, and you can actually feel like, okay, that doesn't work and this works. And it's such a crazy thing.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I can remember just a few specific instances where I spent like a whole week working on music for a certain scene, and then we tried it with an audience, and as soon as it came on, I like everything in me just wanted to run out of the room and just like never work on the movie again, because it for some reason it's like a big magnifying glass. And
Yeah.
and I think it's a good reminder too that we're putting all this work in to try and give this experience to somebody, and so if it's not working for the audience, even if you love it, something's not as good as it could be.
Absolutely. So, kind of overall, with your experience working on, not just the Glass Castle and all the films that you've done so far, in your opinion, what makes a successful score versus an unsuccessful score?
I think it's just a successful score just makes the movie better than it was. And some of the most successful scores are ones you really just don't even notice are there. I think it's funny because in awards world, the only kind of music that's ever going to get noticed, and this is true of any of the creative disciplines that go into filmmaking, there's a difference between a score that's really memorable and is out front and noticeable, and a score that works really well. And so I think the biggest, the best measure is whether or not it is making the film better and making the film more special and more clear and making it move quicker. I always think it's good. Like for me, it's always been important to have another musical outlet, because if I'm trying to get all of my musical ideas out in a film, I'm probably gonna start overdoing it. I think it's good for composers to have another place to put musical ideas, so that you can really just think about what the film needs. And I think I love when a score makes me feel something I've never felt. And I love when it's when there's something special about it. That's, even if it's not really out front, it's just some kind of feeling that it gives me that I feel like, well, I've never gotten to experience this before. And that's what I look for when I go to the theater.
Absolutely, and totally agree with you on that for sure. Well, Joel, I want to thank you again so much for chatting today and getting to talk again. It's been so nice to catch up, and congrats on everything from. It's been just fascinating and really enlightening to listen to your career from Short Term 12 up to now. So it's been great to kind of follow your progress along.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's really nice to catch up, and I'm really excited about this one. So I appreciate you taking the time.